Our Finance Bill Tuesday conversation continues. Our next guest is going to talk to us about SMEs and particularly the startups in the country. And this is Mercy Kimalat. She is the CEO of the Association of Startups and SMEs Enablers of Kenya. Mercy, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Happy to be here.
Very good. Yes. Good to see you here.
Same here.
That's the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Smile lights up the room, man.
Cindy,
Thank you. But I'm also liking the color of the mics, huh?
Cindy, it's Edna's work.
Yeah. Good work, Edna.
You like Edna? Yes, we do.
City, please welcome Mercy with the day's proverb.
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week are from the Republic of Zambia. Only if your luck deserts you, even cold food burns. If your luck deserts you, even cold food burns. What's your interpretation of this, Mercy?
Wow. I think it can have different meanings. You know, for those of us who like nyama choma, that means that succulent, juicy, fatty piece will actually lose its taste, right? But I think also in the context of maybe entrepreneurship, if there's no conducive environment, then whatever you're doing will actually lack the impact that you're seeking to have. So basically, you know, everything you're doing will burn you, right? So it's intended for good, but it ends up becoming something that will actually disadvantage you in the end. Yeah.
Good context. Good perspective. Good one to look at. What's the Association of Startups and SMEs Enablers of Kenya?
So ASSEK, which is the abbreviation for Association of Startup and SME Enablers of Kenya, were founded in 2018 by different founders and leaders of innovation hubs. And what I mean by innovation hubs is that we are an outfit that really supports entrepreneurs through thinking through a business idea, helping them come up with an actual prototype that they can go and test into the market, and then also helping them in the growth stage, now looking at how to build a team, build critical mass in terms of clientele, and then also scaling their products and services across the different regions. And then also finally, the last stage is looking at scale up. So how can you attract large capital, which is venture capital, to now help you accelerate your growth, expand geographically and also increase your impact. So back in 2018, when we founded ASSEK, we were around 40 hubs at that time, but the number has grown over the years, and now we are more than 200 that are part of the ASSEK network that are actually supporting entrepreneurs across the country. And we actually provide mentorship, coaching, training, and even access to markets and investments just to help the entrepreneur start their business, grow, and scale it. A part of the pillars of the association is looking at policy and advocacy, because our members are the ones who are actively doing the hand-holding for the entrepreneurs. We then become the collective voice, taking the feedback from the entrepreneurs, whether they're SMEs, MSMEs, whether it's large corporates, or even looking at how government also wants to support entrepreneurs. Then we actually collaborate together to design policies, influence or advocate for the right regulation frameworks that actually are needed for the startups and SMEs to thrive. Alongside that, we do a lot of events, just trying to build the visibility of the Kenyan startup innovation ecosystem across the world. So that way we partner with chambers of commerce around the world. We also have partners and other similar associations in Africa and also globally, just to create that route to market as well. Because Kenya really has the potential to be a destination of investment and talent. So therefore, we have to continuously promote what we're doing at a global stage, but also from a local perspective.
Mercy, 200 plus hubs in Kenya.
Yeah.
Hubs.
Yes.
You know, when you think about hubs, you think about, that place where these young techies are going and they're innovating and they're thinking and they're sitting somewhere and then they're being, like you said, hand-holding. Yeah. You don't have an office, so you can operate from here for X number of months and then you can move on and then we can also support you in understanding financing. 200 hubs.
Yeah.
Where are they based?
So currently we have 43 out of the 47 counties where they're based. And the idea is actually to have every county having an innovation hub whereby an entrepreneur can just walk in and access the services like what you just mentioned. But we are also facing a bit of constraints on that because we're now looking at sustainability of these different hubs, because also each county has the mandate to make their own laws and pass them, as well as also complying with the national government policies. But the idea is to ensure that as an entrepreneur, entrepreneur, you do not have to travel all the way to Nairobi or to Kisumu or to Mombasa, which are the main cities for innovation. You can actually get a trainer and a coach right where you are within your own county.
Are you dealing with more than innovation, tech innovation? Because you think about innovation nowadays, you're just thinking the tech startups, the guys who are creating an app for this, call it Ngombe, Kuku, whatever. Are you dealing with more than tech? Is there any other innovation, any other thing?
Yeah, so we have different sectors. So we're looking at agriculture as well, because agriculture is also the backbone of the economy. We have manufacturing sector, we have the green and circular economy, and also we have the waste management, which is also a big challenge within Kenya. We also have the creative economy, which actually now is really thriving. And Nakuru County is actually leading on that one. And then also we have manufacturing, the maker spaces sector, which now looking at how can we support entrepreneurs who want to build a hardware solution. So as much as we're focusing so much on ICT and tech, we also need to build the hardware on which these solutions will be sitting on. And so those are some of the different sectors that we are supporting.
Okay. We had an interview here with the American ambassador to Kenya, and she was talking about how this startup ecosystem in Kenya is thriving, that it's actually attracting the highest amount of venture capital in Africa, right? Is this true?
Yes, it is actually.
Or was she talking about, theory? What's the actual practical situation on the ground?
Yeah, so if you look at how Kenya has really grown over the years, I like going back to the genesis of it all. When we laid the sea cable in Mombasa, and that actually allowed for internet penetration to happen across the country, and then also we had the affordable smartphones at that time, the idios, if you guys remember. Actually was very affordable for any entrepreneur, student to actually access it. That really catapulted our technology accessibility and also using technology to develop products and services. If you look at now the ranking, over time now, we've actually been able to attract more than $1.1 billion into the Kenyan startup ecosystem. But that has been largely attributed to foreign investment coming in. Now, that funding has been able to support diverse startups, and many of you know Copia, Sandy, MarketForce, and many others, to be able to now expand their operations and scale. But at the same time, also they're creating a lot of jobs across the entire value chain, right? So it's not only supporting their organization, but really now starting to create new business models along the value chain of where the startup is operating in, for example. The other thing that also we've been able to do is look at global expansion. So many of the Kenyan startups have been able to actually expand and serve more than 20 countries. So for example, I'll give is Workpay. That's a HR platform that supports SMEs manage their payroll, and it's a free advertisement for them, but they actually are doing a really good job. They managed to fundraise, I don't know the exact amount of funding, but they were able to now expand to 20 African countries, and that also increases the number of Kenyans who are also working across Africa, which also is a good thing. But at the same time, also they're increasing the efficiency of how these SMEs are operating so that they can do much more, sell more products and services, reach as many marginalized communities as possible, and thereby expanding their impact.
What does it look like when we talk about then operations in Kenya and looking at what many would call a strained economy to do business, where unfortunately some of the businesses that you mentioned have had to fold in the last 2 to 3 years?
Exactly.
And what have been the factors that have caused that action?
I mean, if there's one thing that Kenya is known for is how we come up with unique products and services and how we scale. The challenge now comes into maturity, right? So if you're looking at how the startups that I've mentioned, like Copia, MarketForce, and many others, they actually were able to reach growth stage, attract even more capital, and now they were trying to head towards the maturity stage. But that's where now the tough economic and political environment comes in at play, whereby if you're looking at half of your profits is going to just being compliant, then when will you actually spend more money in terms of even budgeting for resilience, right? So if you look at currently like the floods that we just experienced a few months back, many of the businesses actually shut down. So one of our members, which is the IOME 254, which is part of Red Cross, they gave us statistics and said that more than 1,000 businesses have actually been wiped out, right? That means they're starting from zero.
Wiped out by?
By the floods.
These recent floods?
Yes, yeah.
1,000?
More than 1,000.
Okay. Literally wiped out.
Wiped out,
away.
dead, yeah.
Okay.
And they have to restart. So even right now, what you're trying to see is how can we even help SMEs and even startups start thinking about developing a resilience mechanism, whether it's a budget issue or whether it's actually building their, scaling up their, or adapting their products so they can fit these environmental hazards. And remember, like what the meteorological department is saying is that also drought is coming up. So that, again, is going to affect the agriculture sector. So if you're an agro processor, you cannot just sit and say, okay, I've already secured my markets in Europe and you're, aggregating avocados, so there's nothing to really worry about. You also have to start thinking about resilience. That's on disaster management. On the economic side, it's getting tougher, not only in Kenya, but even at a global level, whereby even if you look at the amount of funding that investors are trying to put in is also reducing. So what happens again when for startups are trying to fundraise, and then also looking at how also the financing mechanism is changing. One of the biggest challenges we've always had in accessing local capital, and that's actually with the banks, like Stanbic, for example, is how startups and SMEs can access it at affordable rates and at the same time conveniently. They should not be able to wait for a whole 1 month for due diligence, yet they've been a customer for more than 20 years just to access a loan to unlock maybe a container that is stuck at the port. And these are some of the challenges that our startups are facing. Now, if you look at the political angle, if the finance bill has a couple of I don't know what to call them, like disastrous effects that they want to introduce. For example, like the eco levy, right? Last year, we just hosted the Africa Climate Summit, brought in more than 14 heads of state, and really were putting Kenya as the leading frontier across Africa. Then the following year, we're introducing an eco levy tax that really is going to curtail the green and circular economy, which we're trying to promote and help it spur, right? And then the challenge also is looking at, let me just lump them up. And then the challenge is that the fact that our taxes keep changing, I think every quarter of the year. So you cannot even plan as an SME whether to prepare to do budgeting for, do you budget for taxes or do you budget for growth, right? So let me just make it super practical. If I have a conference, for example, in Berlin and I need to go and exhibit, and then there's a new tax introduced that's going to wipe out literally the budget that I set for the marketing expo. What am I going to choose? It's a tough call, right? And so for you as a business owner, you should not be thinking about how to be compliant throughout, but also thinking about growth and management. So that's some of the things that the finance bill is bringing out as a challenge, because if we're going to start introducing new taxes over the period, then that becomes a hindrance for them to grow and also to scale.
So ASSEK went to the finance committee and you told them, OTEC. Hapana West. What are the issues that you're raising there?
So from us, we actually analyzed the entire finance bill. We came up with 30 clauses that were quite contentious, and we actually did a written submission to the committee, but also providing an oral submission. So I can just share a few that we actually were able to share. The first one was looking at clause 35 H and J of the finance bill, which looks at the removal of zero-rated status for the e-mobility sector goods. That means that any item that has been zero-rated for electronic bikes, so the supply of electronic bicycles, the supply of solar and lithium-ion batteries, the supply of electric buses of tariff heading to 87.02. They wanted to remove the VAT exemption on that. And the idea was that last year, I think also the Electric Association also made a submission to the committee to actually provide an incentive to encourage more investors and even the consumers to uptake the electric bikes and many other facilities. But now with the introduction of that tax, that means that now we're going to see now a reduction in terms of investors who are coming in to actually invest in this still nascent sector, which is the green economy. And then also looking at how there is no local supply chain, because even that's some of the challenges that they're facing. Everything that we have has to be imported and then assembled in Kenya versus actually trying to manufacture these parts here locally. So with that kind of VAT introduction to that sector, then we're looking at a local supply chain being disrupted, and we'll be heavily importing some of these goods into the country. The other thing is also looking at the removal of the VAT exemption for the plant machinery and equipment used in the construction of a plant recycling of a plastic recycling plant. The bill proposes to standard rate plant machinery and equipment used in construction of a plastic recycling plant. Now, for us, our proposal was that they need to delete that provision, and the justification was that we need to encourage investment in the construction, manufacturing and plastic recycling. As I mentioned to you, if you look at the green and circular economy in Kenya, we've really done a lot of strides in terms of how we've innovated around the sector, and you're seeing a lot of bins even in the malls that are trying to recycle used laptops, computers, even electric equipment. But now with that introduction, then we're actually going to discourage further investment in the manufacturing sector, and more so in the plastic recycling and construction, because the cost will go up and no one is actually able to bear the cost, especially the consumer. The other one that I wanted to touch on, because there can be quite a lot, we had a joke during break about bread, where we all talking about bread, but at the end of the day we have to eat, right? And alongside the bread was looking at the introduction of the excise duty on vegetable oil. So the bill proposes to introduce excise duty on vegetable oils at a rate of 25%. Now the challenge, again going back into that, is that we're seeing a lot of SMEs and startups in the agro processing sector, but also many of them are doing what we call hustles or gigs. So if you're looking at bakers and many others, they actually rely heavily on these inputs for them to do that. Okay. So when that increases, then guess what? When you are trying to buy a cake, let's say for 1,500, now you'll have to buy it at double the cost, because the cost of input has gone up. And that also will affect all those other hustlers or the gig workers that are trying to make an extra living just to supplement their income as well.
Do we actually have many of those?
We have many. You know, if you go on Instagram, actually they're the ones who have really made Instagram and TikTok really thrive, because they have, you know, the products and services that just bring people together. You know, Africans love to eat.
Confectionaries and cakes and such, and supplying weddings and events and birthdays, and there are actually very many of them in this sector now.
Exactly.
So that means that all these things are going to be expensive.
Exactly. And also you've seen that even now Kenya is importing milk. So are we also going to say we're going to start importing cakes?
Where?
You know, because it actually might be half the cost if this bill actually goes through. So we're literally killing our own economy in terms of producing these things, which is not a good thing.
As an organization, have you ever participated in this sort of public participation in previous finance bills?
Yes, we have. So this year was our first time making an oral submission, but previous year we've been participating the past 3 years, providing written submission. And also just to say that we don't only focus on the finance bill, because that one is one of the bills that we also focus on. The other one that I want to bring in also, which is very contentious, is the ICT bill that has just refused to die. You know, and hopefully you can invite me to come and talk about that. But that bill also is trying to curtail the ICT sector by setting up a board that is going to govern how ICT professionals do their business, or even how they develop apps and which apps are they supposed to be using. And then also there's a mandatory fee that they have to pay every year just to be part of, just to actually get a certification to operate as an IT professional.
What's wrong with that?
The challenge is that, if, for example, for me, I studied business and information technology. We were able to build apps that actually supplemented our income, right? So that also means that we cannot actually even start thinking about developing prototype apps, you know, the M-Burger and the different applications. That actually will become illegal for students to do that, because the regulation has to come in.
Are you saying wholesale that regulations are bad?
No, we have to be compliant. What we're just saying is that we're still a developing country, right? So in the innovation space, we're actually around 10 years mature, but that is still young if you compare to the development economies. What we're saying is that we cannot adopt a developed economy policy framework and then bring it back to a local economy that is still growing. The beauty about Kenya and what we've been able to see in our sector is that how we've been able to adapt and to contextualize different policies, different innovations, and many other even investments in that regard. So what we're just saying is that we need to co-create together with government and the regulation bodies to find what works for us. Because if you look at Kenya, we're actually supporting the entire East Africa community.
How's that coming along, this working with government?
Well, it's a journey. Policy is a journey. It doesn't happen the change doesn't happen in 1 month or even a year, but it's something continuous, and that's why we do continuous advocacy and lobby. But currently, we do have a partnership with the Ministry of Investments, Trade and Industry. We actually have an MOU signed with them, and with that, we've been able to come closer to the government in terms of working with all the government enabling agencies. For example, if you're looking at KIPI, if you're looking at KEBS, if you're also looking at KIE, that's the Kenya Industrial Estates, and also KIRDI. So KIRDI, for example, has centers across Kenya that actually entrepreneurs can walk into and actually be able to manufacture their products there. So if you're doing agro-processing, if you're doing confectionery, if you're doing baking, you can actually access that facility and use it at a subsidized cost. At the same time, also getting tech talent. So our partnership with MITI on this one, and it's a project that has been funded by World Bank, which is called the Kenya Industry Entrepreneurship Project, is looking at how can we then, one, create a conducive and enabling environment to spur up manufacturing sector, right? So previously Kenya was known for producing things, but now that has dwindled over the time. And the finance bill also is a testament of how we're going to continue deteriorating on that path. But the idea is how can we then come up with the right investment mechanism that we can also tap into the different funds that the government has provided, whether it's Hustler Fund, whether it's a Women Fund, or the Youth Fund, and many others, and also looking at how can we provide direct capital as a government to the startups and the SMEs, but also alongside funding the people that are supporting the startups and the SMEs. And that's what we call the innovation hubs, right? Because the innovation hubs have always been a silent, I like to call them the silent engine, powering up the Kenyan economy. Because when you see an entrepreneur thrive, just know that they actually received mentorship and coaching, or even a subsidized co-working space for them to operate on. And therefore, we also need them to be recognized, and that is why ASSEK even was also formed to lobby for their interest, to say that we can actually partner, for example, with the county government, provide the county enterprise program, and deliver it within the county spaces or facility to ensure that youth, women, and even other emerging entrepreneurs have access to these opportunities.
So these subsidies you speak of, who provides them?
For our end, now the challenge with the work that we do is that we are heavily focused on impact versus profit. Thereby, we actually bring in different partners, such as development partners. So, for example, like World Bank is also funding the government now to support us in providing this kind of capacity building support to the entrepreneur support organizations, but also to the SMEs and startups.
So the government does help?
No, it does. It does. The government also is listening. And we can actually see how even in the previous finance bill, for the clauses that we actually petitioned, they were actually removed. Some remained. So you can't win everything, but you can at least win 50% of the battle. So
something that you said, 43 of 47 counties have hubs. The other 4, why?
Well, it's more of one, looking at the local county environment, and also looking at the investment to set up there. So if you're looking at so some of the work that we do as an association is that we find there's some counties that have a very low entrepreneurial culture. Therefore, there's more groundwork that needs to be done. So if you're going to a county and you find maybe most of the entrepreneurs are actually relocated to Nairobi or Nakuru or Eldoret or Kisii and other counties, then you find that other counties do not have any entrepreneur operating within that county. So what we try to do now for the 4 remaining counties is looking at how can we then support them in terms of, one, building that entrepreneurial culture. So we do that either through research that we've conducted, for example, in Western Kenya, where we assess the business and policy, regulation environment. We also ask investors, why would you not consider going into those counties and scouting for opportunities as well? And investors doesn't have to be only banks or individuals. It can also be corporations who want to set up there to begin to tap into the local resources in that county. So we are still in that discussion, seeing how can we, one, create a value proposition to our own members to also set up in those counties, and then also to attract more entrepreneurs to scale their products and services into those counties. But for that to work, we need to have an enabling framework for the startups and SMEs to operate in, and also even incentives for the entrepreneur support organizations or the innovation hubs to come in and provide subsidized training and coaching to support more entrepreneurs to come up. So it's more like a systemic kind of issue, but also looking at how the uptake and interest is as well.
Mercy, as you paint this picture, I'm just looking at, because here we are talking about where we are currently in the season where, Thursday's coming, whatever is going to be adopted will be adopted. So on one hand, we see that an environment has been created, like you talk about, for the fostering of, conducive environment for SMEs to thrive, right? Yeah. You talk about Kirdi and the fantastic work that they do. And, maybe then access to subsidized rates and things like this. But then that's on one hand. But on the other hand, we see it's almost as though it is a targeted effort to make sure that these same organizations that you support, on one hand, it's like you're almost making sure that they die. How then can a balance be created when on one hand it's fantastic to see, entrepreneurs, agribusiness innovators, things like that. And then on the other hand, what you breathe and it's taxed. It's looking like, that's what it's looking like. So then how do we reconcile with all of this at the same time? How do you then continue putting one step in front of the other? What do you do?
Well, it's a tough one, right? And that's why we call for collaboration amongst the different stakeholders and different associations also to come together to have one voice, because it is our own country, right? So we need to remain patriotic in that regard. So yes, the government has done fantastic work, like I mentioned to you, laying the critical infrastructure that has supported Kenya really spiral in terms of, or even leapfrog on technological revolution. But then also, if you're looking at even the current finance bill, this is a case in point. They want to they actually want to increase the tax from 1.5% to 6% on the digital service tax, and then now rename it to SEP, So what does that mean? So even us being here on studio and recording and sharing this live on Facebook and in many other platforms, that will also be affected, because now Facebook will have to increase the cost back to the consumer in terms of accessing this content online and digitally. So what we're just trying to do is, one, create and provide data-driven evidence back to the government and say, I know you're trying to raise taxes and we completely understand. The Eurobond is coming, we have to pay it. We get it. Even SMEs also have loans, so they also have to restructure, right? But the idea is that, can we come up with a framework whereby we can still continue supporting these SMEs and startups to thrive as we figure out how we can restructure the different existing policies so that we can actually increase more income to the government, so that they can facilitate investments or infrastructure. Now, the other bigger challenge that we're seeing as the non-for-profit sector or even private sector is that even as we are doing the budgeting process and even coming up with a finance bill, we're not addressing the systemic issue of how money is being leaked, right? So we're busy here collecting different taxes, introducing new VAT taxes, increasing them, which in a way makes a logical sense, because maybe perhaps the economy is growing, quote unquote, but we're not seeing on the other end is what is happening to all this revenue that is being generated, right? So KRA will go and say they've been able to collect X amount of billions, but Kenyans do not actually get a report back and say this amount went to this ministry and this is what happened, and actually showing the actual projects on the ground of what happened. Because now then us as private sector would actually be able to come in and actually do an impact assessment of the government projects and funds and say, actually, all the funding and the taxes that we have been paying, they actually are contributing back to the Kenyan economy. So we are lacking in terms of accountability on the expenditure and allocation of all these funds down to the common mwananchi, and even more so to the businesses that are actually working so hard to be able to generate the income. But the challenge is that all the income that they're generating is going back into compliance.
You don't see where it's going. You don't see where the money is going to be spent. But this is available, Mercy. This is information that's available.
No, the data is there, of course, on the website. But on the actual ground, it becomes a challenge. And then remember also, we've had so many cases of corruption and money, being diverted to other uses. Where is it actually going? Because I don't. The one thing that we also say in the entrepreneurship sector, you must be compliant, because even for you to attract investment, you must show how you're registered, even your audited accounts and everything. So that one is necessary. You must pay taxes.
Can I ask you an honest question?
Yeah.
You are an adult Kenyan who's clearly lived here for many years, and it is clear to me that you eat ugali. Are you telling me you don't know where the money goes?
It's the accountability, actually. No, so, yeah. The allocations are done.
We all know where the money goes.
Oh, I don't want to say anything
Can you account for it?
No. You see, that's the whole point. Accounting for it means you keep insisting it has gone to where we clearly know it didn't go. That is the accounting that we get. The issue isn't do we know, the issue is what are we doing about it. Because we do know. Because we always say we don't know. We do know where the money goes. We even know the individuals who are responsible for that money going where it has gone. We know. Okay, it is not a secret. The emperor is walking naked. And here we are pretending that the emperor has clothes. So the conversation about where the money goes, in my opinion, should change. We know where the money goes. What are we going to do about it? So long as we keep saying we don't know where the money goes, then that narrative more or less just begins and ends right there. We don't know where the money goes. We do know where it goes.
And the money keeps going.
Yes, and it keeps going. We know where it keeps going to. Okay? Like now we are repairing roads. Okay? Some roads will be repaired. Some will not be repaired. There'll be a budget, and it's in the billions. It always is in the billions.
Tens of billions.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yes, for that element of accuracy. Yes. And we will look at the road, look at the repairs, and we'll ask, Aish, this doesn't quite relate with that money. And we'll be saying, well, where did the money go? We know exactly where it has gone. Please continue.
What would you have us do, CT?
Let's have a little more honest conversation. You, Eric, more than anybody else has on this show, said so often, can we have just an honest conversation about these matters? An honest conversation as in, look, folks, someone is taking our money. Some people are taking our money. So, money is an inanimate object. It doesn't walk. It has to be taken. For it to move, it has to move with somebody. Somebody has to make sure that it moves. So what do we do about it? The honest conversation is, right, we've figured this out. We've understood. Now, what do we do? That's the honest conversation. And what can we do? What are we able to do? And are we willing to do it? Yeah, that's an honest conversation.
So it's about tightening our oversight.
Yes, because
and controls.
Yes, those we gave the delegated authority to represent us have let us down considerably and consistently. So we don't need to pretend that we know we know exactly how they think. We know what they're going to do. So let's take back the authority that is actually ours. We gave it to them. We can take it back, and in taking it back, we can say, guys, we know we gave you this job. Clearly, it's a little beyond your capacity. So why don't we, who gave you the job, do what we know? What needs to be done.
And just adding on to that, and that's why for example, associations are formed, right?
Yes.
So how can you ensure that every common mwananchi has the voice represented? So one thing as ASSEK that we constantly do, we try to demystify policy, because policy can be very lengthy. Even if you listen to the different conversations that they're having, the policy documents that are almost 6,000 pages. As a common mwananchi, are you going to spend time reading 6,000 pages and it's in legalese and you can't even understand it and interpret? So as ASSEK, what we try to do is we host public participation forums, whereby now we bring in the community, we bring in the startups and SMEs. We also have our members who are the entrepreneur support organizations and innovation hubs. And then also we bring in government, right, to actually help us understand what are some of the priority areas that they have marked for, and also the budgets that they actually have allocated. I'll give an example. For example, if you look at the Women Fund and the Youth Fund, they're also saying that they are not, like many youth and women are not tapping into those funds that are available, because of lack of awareness. So information flow is becoming limited. So by having those kind of forums, then as a community or as a citizen of the country, you need to participate and also have your voice there. The other thing also is about going back to civic duty, right? So many of us did vote. For me, I voted, right? So I take accountability for the government that I chose. But the idea is now, how then do we ensure that we actually correct the situation that is not going well? And that's why, as an association, we write documents. So one thing I'll tell you about government is that they do listen, but there's a way that you also have to follow in terms of procedure so that they can follow through. By having written communication that can be logged in their system, then you actually have participated in giving your voice in that regard. But there's a lot that needs to be done in that regard. But still, I'd always encourage, let's continue using our voice, because that is something that we do have as a citizen in the country, or even as an SME or as a startup. Join the relevant network like ASSEK and ensure that your voice is counted when they are making the policies that will lock you, not only for the 1 year, but even for years to come as well.
Do you think what you presented before Parliament will be taken into account?
They were receptive because the committee is a representation of the entire Parliament. They were receptive to it. We did write the actual rephrasement of the clauses that we thought were quite disastrous. We did give recommendations, such as, for example, you should not charge an SME 2 million Kenya shillings every month just because they're not registered on e-Teams. We gave them a fair an affordable penalty that an SME should be able to pay for, around 20,000 or 20,000 or 10,000, because we understand where the SMEs are coming from. We know how much money in terms of profit they're making, and it doesn't even hit more than 500,000 Kenya shillings. So asking them to pay 2 million, and they still have to pay school fees, and they have other lives that they have to live, then it becomes a bit of a challenge.
Mercy, thank you very much for joining us today. Mercy Kimalat. Mercy Kimalat is the CEO of the Association of Startups and SMEs Enablers of Kenya.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.